Hey everyone, this is Kevin from the chesswebsite.com. Today we're going to be going over the Conquest Attack. It's a variation in the Evans Gambit decline line, trying to give white more options to continue an attack when black does not want to come along for the ride in the accepted lines in the Evans Gambit. If you're not familiar with the Evans Gambit, one of the more popular gambits you'll see out there, e4, e5, knight f3, knight c6, and then after bishop come to the center of the board, white decides I want to give up some material, so plays b4. Now the accepted line is the bishop takes here, c3, the bishop comes back to a5 since it's under attack, and then pawn d4. Now this pawn is being pinned down to the king, so does have to think about that, but white's going to go down material here, but really opening up a lot of the lines for his pieces to get really involved into the game. You could see while white's focused on the center, black has been moving his bishop around here, quite a few moves, has not really developed any of his other material. So yes, white's going to go down a little bit, but does have a lot of attacking lines. In the decline line in the Evans Gambit, black says, yeah, I don't even want to take that material here on b4. I'm going to come back to b6, keep my pressure here on the f2 pawn, which at the beginning is only defended by the king on e1. I'm not playing your games. Now the main line continues. White's going to push forward a4, just starting to put pressure on this bishop here. If black does not respond with something like a6, then just pushing forward to a5 is going to be extremely good for white, but usually we are going to see this a6. And then the pawn could push forward if he wants here to a4, but more common is knight to c3, just getting more material involved into the center of the game. And then knight to f6. Black does have a few options here, but knight to f6 is extremely common. And this is where we get into the Conquest Attack, because by default, there's a lot of options. This is the decline line, so no material has come off the board here. Pretty safe to play castle on the king side. Could bring your knight up here to d5, a nice little outpost here. If he wants to exchange with his knight, that's going to be completely okay. Or if you just want to push forward a5, bishop comes back here to a7, that's fine as well. Really starting to squeeze here on the queen side, limit the squares that your opponent can go to. But the Conquest Attack says, I'm not okay with any of those. I'm still comfortable giving up some material because I want a strong attack. I want to really open up this board state and really attack my opponent. And so that's where we come up with the Conquest Attack of d4. Now our opponents never have to do exactly what we want them to, so they don't have to take this material here. They could castle on the king side if they do, or if they play another move like d6. Both of those cases are going to end up with us taking here on e5. And this is probably not best for black, but sometimes if they're in that Evans Gambit decline line, they're just like, I'm not taking a gambit. Doesn't even matter. They could bring their knight down to g4. We're going to castle on the king side. They may take this material back. We could see an exchange right here. And then after the knight comes, attacks our bishop back to b3. This is going to be completely fine. Neither side is up material right here, but I do think white has a very strong game in this spot. So if we come back and say, what if doesn't castle on the king side? What if they instead decide to play d6? Going to be the same thing, but it's going to be slightly variation depending on how they exchange material. Knight's usually going to take. We could see take right here, pawn takes, and then you can see, yes, the queens come off the board. Some people don't like to play when the queens come off the board that early, but that just is how it's going to work out. But now when the king takes, the bishop can freely take here on f7. So this does give some options for white to get some material here. If we see the bishop down to d4, this is a great outpost move. Pretty easy, just play rook to a3. Defending this knight, you're going to be castling on the king side pretty soon here because they could be playing knight g4, starting to put a lot of pressure on the f2 square. So that's what's going to happen if they don't take the material. More than likely, from what I've seen, they are going to take that material in the center of the board. So we're going to look at the main variations if they decide to take that material after you play d4. Let's say they decide to take with their pawn right here, which makes a lot of sense. They are giving up their central e-pawn, but it does take a material, also attacks the knight here on c3. And white has a couple options, but I would recommend the knight coming to d5. This gives you a lot of variations where black can make some mistakes. Usually they're going to take with their knight right here. They don't have to. If they decide, yeah, I'm just not taking that material, they castle on the king side. Bishop to g5, pinning down the knight to the queen. This is a combo that you'll see quite a bit in this Conquest Attack, but this is both attacking with the knight right here and the bishop. Same thing is, instead of if they castle on the king side, they could play d6 here. Same thing, bishop to d6. Yeah, they want to get their bishop involved into the game, but this is putting a lot of pressure on this knight on f6. We've already squeezed their queen side over here. This is adding pressure on the king side. But more than likely, they're going to take with their knight. Knight takes, pawn's going to capture here, and then they have a couple options. The main line is going to be to play queen to e7, attacking our side. And although it looks weird, the best move for white is to play king to f1. We really like our queen here on d1. It's eventually going to defend this pawn here on d4 if the knight gets involved into the game. Don't want to bring it over here and just exchange off the board right away. White is down material here, and so wants to keep that queen to make it just easier to get back later on to the game. Now from here, if they play e5, which is pretty common, their knight's under attack. They no longer have a check that they're putting on white. Now a very good move would be to play d6. And the reason for this is if they are going to take with their queen, then bishop to f4 puts a lot of pressure on them. The knight's being pinned down. Yes, the knight's also attacking it as well. And this is going to be a very good spot for black. So just keep that in mind. If you see this position, playing that d6 is going to be good. Now, if we come back, if the queen does not come to e7, they may say, hey, my knight's under attack. I'm just going to take this material here on b4. That's also fine. Just castle on the king side. Yes, you are going down some material, but later on we will be able to get this back pretty easily. Now, if we come back to this position in the Conquest Attack, instead of the pawn taking, maybe the bishop takes here on d4. There is going to be an exchange. Knight takes, pawn takes here, and the knight comes back to d5, as we have seen before. The main difference is the bishop is not here on b6 to defend the pawn on d4. Usually the knight's going to exchange right here. We talked about what happens if they do not here, but the pawn's going to recapture, and usually the knight comes and takes down on b4. If it doesn't, great, you don't have to worry about that. But now white's down 2 pawns, and I'm recommending here castle on the king side. This does put a lot of pressure if black does not castle on the king side for rook to e1. You have the bishop right here, which you could play pawn to d6 at some point. You can get the queen involved into the game. The bishop can start to attack very quickly. So they usually need to castle on the king side. But as soon as they do, bishop to a3, pinning down the knights right here. We talked earlier about how you get some of that material back. I said later on, I don't want to do an entire game to show, because I want to show different examples of variations that you'll see in the Conquest Attack. But one example, you could see a5 here, defending this knight here on b4, so an outpost move. But then the bishop takes, pawn recaptures, queen to d4, and it's going to be very difficult to hold on to this material here on b4. You can't just bring the pawn down here. Maybe they just say, yeah, okay, don't worry about it. I'm going to get my bishop involved into the game. Rook to b1, you can see very easily that white's going to be able to gobble up this material. And then all of a sudden, yeah, we are even on board. Very open board state as well, and white has very active pieces. So this is one way that you can get around or get some of that material back that we talked about that you've given up right away. If we come back, instead of the bishop taking here, the last option would be for the knight to take. And this is also pretty common. And so knight takes here on d4. It's an outpost. You're going to now take here on e5, which is a little bit different. In the past, we've been saying, hey, exchange here on d4, and then they recapture, and the knight comes up here to d5. It's going to be slightly different in this case. I'm recommending the knight take here on e5. Now, if they want to castle on the king side, that's not the best move for them, but I would still go ahead and do this. In this case, I would play pawn to a5. the bishop comes back here, and then bishop to e3. And if you're curious why even that in-between move, maybe you've seen this in the past, and you're like, yeah, I mean, the bishop on a7 tends to be about the same here. The main reason for that is if you see some exchanges going on, maybe they don't want to exchange in the center because there's the bishop, the knight, and the queen right here. You could see the knight take here, pawn recaptures, bishop takes, and then when the rook recaptures, you can see how black's set up. You usually want your rooks on the back row connected. Usually want to bring them to the center of the board to attack. Right now, once you recapture with your rook here on a7, this is not the placement that you want. With the bishop here on b6, if there's an exchange, you can just recapture with your pawn right here. That's completely fine. You have double pawns on the c file, and then it goes to double pawns on the b file. You're going to be completely okay. You're just going to push on the queen side of the board. When you recapture with your rook, it's a slight disadvantage for black. You can always overcome this, but it is going to take some time. You're usually going to be bringing your rook back here to a8 and then swing it to the center of the board. So that's one of those small little things where if you're curious why you might play that pawn to a5, that is exactly why. Now, instead of castling, because castling I don't think is the best option for black once we play that knight to e5, another option would be queen to e7. Attacking the knight. Once you play this knight e5, which is the one variation that we are showing it here, you got to hold on to the fort here. So bishop to f4, and then if they want to take here on b4, because that is open here, you are going to need to bring your bishop back here to d2. It is pinning down the knight here. You just are going to have to defend. Then you're going to be looking to castle on the king side. So that is the Conquest Attack in the Evans Gambit. If you ever play the Evans Gambit, definitely one of my favorite openings. I really like giving up material early on for a strong attack. If you don't like giving up some material, feel like you can come back later and with a strategic advantage in controlling the center of the board and the tempo, get that material back and then have a strong attacking game. I do not recommend the Conquest Attack because many times you are giving up one or two pawns and you will have to find a very aggressive line to get that material back. But if you can, this is a very strong attack to have in the Evans game, especially if you're going up against these decline lines, which you will see quite often. Players just don't like to play into the Evans game. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this video. Always looking to do variations of openings. Sometimes they're extremely unique like this. Sometimes they're extremely common. So if you have an opening that you say, hey, can you dig a little bit deeper into this particular variation, feel free to let me know. The best way to get a hold of me is email. You could find the email on the website about us or just the chess websites at gmail.com. Thank you guys so much for watching. I'll see you guys in the next video.